Welcome everyone. If this is your first time visiting, this event is hosted by the Engineering Education Transformations Institute. We are a unit in the College of Engineering that focuses on engineering education, on basically the entire scope of that, including engineering education research, engineering education professional development for both faculty and graduate students. This is part of our faculty development programming. My name is John Morlock. I'm the Associate Director in charge of most of the faculty development programming, and I'm happy to have you all here. There are no other big announcements happening right now, so I will pass it directly over to Racheida, the star of our event today. Take over when you're ready.
All right, thank you, John. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining me as a part of this conversation, and also John for inviting me to have this conversation. I know for some of us, or for most of us, this is a pretty important topic, but sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable to discuss. So I'm happy for those of you who are here, who are willing to be a part of the discussion, and ultimately a part of some positive change that we can make here at UGA. All right, so welcome. And this presentation was developed based on the work of the Black in Engineering group. So this is a group of Black faculty at universities across the country who banded together to ways in which universities at various levels can work towards anti-racism and being more inclusive and equitable to students of color or people of color. I like to preface this. And when I was preparing this presentation, I learned that on the 22nd of September, there was an executive order from the White House that essentially stated that federal funding would be removed from companies or from military branches that employed anti-racism trainings. And the wording is a little bit awkward in the executive order, but it's explicitly saying that being anti-racist is anti-American, or has been deemed anti-American by this current administration. However, I like to say that in order for us to grow, we need to acknowledge and confront all truths. So me as a person who is overweight, I cannot begin to move into a healthy lifestyle if I don't confront the fact that I eat Chick-fil-A 3 out of 5 days of the week, right? So, and it kind of sucks to have to come up with those type of scenarios sometimes to draw the connections, but essentially in order for us to make positive changes, we have to face some of the uncomfortable truths that we aren't familiar with, because that's the only way we'll be able to blossom. So our agenda today, we'll talk about some overarching principles of how to move forward towards anti-racism. And then we'll discuss some recommendations, and we'll actually do this as a breakout session and then sort of a report out as we regroup. And then there'll be some times for questions and answers in the end. So the overarching principles that we'll discuss is the attitude in which you have in approaching this, clarity around the topic, accountability, excuse me, both at the institutional level and also personal level, and then commitment and resources. And I had this sort of cyclical because I don't think one of these exists without the other, and it could actually be bidirectional as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you go clockwise as mentioned here, but these are the things that we'll touch on today. So the first thing we'll talk about is attitude. And the best way to approach this is with the assumption that here at UGA, we are a predominantly white institution. And that unfortunately the institution suffers from some deep systemic racism. We can't ignore the fact that US history is racist, right? So we think about slavery, we think about the erasure of indigenous people, and depending upon where you lived and what your background is, you also experience some sort of marginalization. So there, at one point, the Irish was marginalized and those sort of things. And then also thinking about our university here, UGA was founded in 1785. It's one of the first public institutions of higher education. However, women were not allowed to be admitted to UGA until 1918, and African Americans weren't admitted until 1961. So that's where the systemic part comes in, where there are systems in place that can keep certain people from gaining access to education, healthcare, whatever, based on things that really have no basis. So ultimately, the responsibility for fixing the system lies within us. You know, we work in the system, so it is up to us to do the work that we possibly can to encourage the system to change. Refusing to acknowledge responsibility is complicit in how you may or may not benefit from it. So essentially, if you're not a part of fixing the problem, then unfortunately you are a part of the problem. And today we're going to be discussing ways in which we can all be a part of the problem in our various roles. We know that some people here may have more power than others, but we all can play a role in some way, whether big or small, into making things better, either at the college level or at the institutional level. So in moving into clarity, I just want to preface the fact that, you know, this issue of focus is anti-Black racism. I cannot nor will I speak about racism that may be employed towards Indigenous people or to Latinx people or Hispanic people, other persons of color, while addressing anti-Black racism may also help those groups. I recognize that as a Black person, I cannot speak on the marginalizations of those other people. But if those people are in your spaces and they're saying, hey, these things are also true for people, my people and people in my group, then I encourage you all to listen to them. But I do want to preface this, that this is not a one size fits all sort of approach. And granted, I am just one Black person, so even this may not be a clean cut slice for every Black person who may be at the institution, but this is a start. And then recognizing that racism does manifest at intersections, right? So things do get dicey once you start to add different types of identities, whether it's a person who is Black and there are a woman, or a Black person who is a part of the LGBTQIA community. And the same thing goes for other sorts of intersections, maybe someone who's disabled. So these things start to get a lot more complex once you start to add in some of the additional identities that people have, in addition to their Blackness, their whiteness, Latin heritage, etc. So recognizing that through this intersection, racism does affect every person very differently, and prevent certain individuals from living full and nourished lives. So an example of that could be essentially, if I face or feel like I'm faced with discrimination as a Black woman, I don't know if I'm being discriminated against because I am a woman or because I'm Black, especially in a predominantly male space or predominantly white male space. So as an engineer, it makes it very difficult if I feel someone's coming for me, which identity they're coming for, or they might actually be coming for both, right? And even within the same race, you have people where there's misogynoir, so that is misogyny against Black women from Black men. And the same thing is probably true in other cultures. So in thinking about accountability, one is the institutional accountability, right? So part of that deals with promises and statements of commitment, and not following up with corresponding incentives or clear consequences for failure. So I know that it can be somewhat difficult to, show all of your cards, essentially say, hey, here are all the things that we have in place in order to move the needle in a certain way. But at the same time, if you are guarding how much progress you have made, then it sometimes leave you open to criticism to people who feel like you're not making any progress at all, right? There's also a piece of making progress, but maybe not enough in the time frame that you did. And there also could be criticism based on that. Like if you said that you were going to do something in the next 3 years and you're kind of falling short, then we recognize that there may be some criticism along with that. But understanding that in some cases it is better to be transparent and where your progress is so that you can solicit help from those who really believe that you are doing your best to make the progress or make the changes that you are committed or said you have committed to do. Right. So goals for change and racial equity should be measurable and hold real implications for university administration. So if we are not moving the needle, then what can we be doing to do so? And then who gets held accountable if we don't? So for example, if I don't check the box for tenure, then the person who is held accountable for me not getting tenure is me, right? And that's, everyone in their own respective jobs. And part of an institution adopting a real commitment to making sure that we are creating an equitable space for those who come to us for work or for an education, that there are actual consequences around not making this space safe for them. Accountability from a personal level is very individualized. Every university leader, department head, dean, provost, even the president needs to make a personal commitment to understanding how the workings of their department, their college, university, whatever level they serve, even as an instructor in your classroom, how racism may or may not impact the space in which you serve. And then recognizing what you can do within the power that you have to make this space more equitable and inclusive to those who are a part of it. So this reworking, this personal work and accountability is not something that can simply be handed off to a committee, right? So we can have trainings come in, we can have experts come in to provide tools in which you can work to better yourself, which some of that will be discussed today. But ultimately, it is an individual thing, right? So if I think about, again, going back to being fat, right? An institution might be, the United States and obesity. Well, personally, what can I do about that? I personally can go to the gym every day, or I personally can try to eat more salads or eat less Chick-fil-A, right? So I can't outsource the work that I need to do on myself to someone else. I can't outsource it to my doctor. Ultimately, I have to do the work in order for me to make the changes that I want to see for myself, and how that might benefit the bigger system at play. And the same thing goes in this space. What can we all do at whatever level we serve to make this space more inclusive to the people who decide to join us in it? So commitment and resources, the only action that yields results is a firm, prompt commitment to change. So going back to the previous slide, is really sticking your feet in the mud and say, yes, this is what we're going to do, right? And as engineers especially, we love numbers, we love fancy graphs, or whatever the case may be, however we like to look at data, we all like data in some way. So how can we use data to inform the decisions we make? And if there's some data missing, what can we be doing to collect that information so that we are making sure that the actions that we are taking do yield results that is purposeful and intent for maintaining a positive environment for those who work for us and for those of us, for those who come here for an education, right? It also means avoid using scapegoats as a reason for little to no progress, right? So we want to avoid pointing fingers at other entities or other people, for example. So for a long time, I blamed my being overweight on my mother. Well, now I've been at my mother's house for 10 years, so there's really no excuse for me to be overweight if I have an issue with it, to blame that on my parents, because I'm not with my parents anymore. They're no longer responsible for me. So avoid using those scapegoats and really think about, again, the power that you have at whatever level you serve and what can you do? And if you are short on power, you know, how can you collaborate with others to increase power? So as a faculty member, you know, I may not have enough power to change my department head stance on a certain issue. But maybe if I talk to other faculty members and some even more senior than I, and we come together, then maybe together we can, you know, influence our department head's decision on an action. Same thing goes at the college level and even at the institutional level. So as one entity, we may not be able to do a lot, but maybe we can convince others who also believe in the same cause to make a positive change that benefits everyone involved. And then lastly, making sure that we reflect on the statements that we make in support. So are these statements measurable? Are we doing the steps to make sure that they're measurable? Are the actions that we're taking transparent? Or are they sort of performative? Are they performative acts of solidarity? Because at the end of the day, those performative acts will essentially fall apart. People will be able to see them, and as we may experience or even begin to learn that things continue to happen when there isn't change that prevents them from doing so. And then how many statements are you going to release if things continue to happen without there being some real change behind them? So in a minute, we are going to do a privilege check. But before I provide the link for you to do so, I actually want to show you my score. And I present this up front because sometimes when we have discussions about privilege, certain groups who have more privilege than others feel like it's an attack on them and their person. And by no means is checking your privilege a personal attack. It's just recognizing the benefits or affordances that you may have had in life that gives you certain advantages over other people. And so as a Black woman, I scored 53 out of 100 points, right? So there were a lot of things on that list that did not apply for me. I recognize that I have privilege because I'm able-bodied. I am cisgendered, so I was born female, I identify as female, I'm also heterosexual. Did we struggle for money growing up? A little bit, but my parents managed their money enough where they could afford to give me luxuries that when I think back on it, I honestly don't know how they did it. So I preface this because I do have a privilege over certain groups. I have privilege over Black trans people, right? Or maybe even some trans people in general. I have privilege over people who have student loans because I don't have student loans. So I encourage you all to, when we get to the next slide on the link, that when you take this quiz, you know, it's not for you to feel attacked, but for you to sort of maybe see where you are compared to where some other people may be. And for those of you who may score higher than 53%, how can you benefit those of us who are at 53, or for those people who may have scored 20, right? So let's take 5 to 10 minutes to complete the survey. Please make sure you keep your results handy because they will be important as we move throughout the rest of the presentation. So here's a short link for you all to go check. Thanks, John. I was just about to type it. Once you completed your survey, please use your thumbs up, and that way I can gauge when we are ready to move forward.
I didn't understand the one about cheeseburgers. Were you paying attention? So, Racheida, I had trouble spelling privilege.
I would say John also put the link in the chat.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna give everyone about 1 more minute. I've seen a few thumbs up come through.
Here, how do I do a thumbs up? There. Yeah, okay.
Oh, that works too, Sid.
Oh, yeah. Here. Yeah. Pikachu thumbs up.
All right. So I hope that you all saved your results, like not close the screen just yet. Because again, we will talk about them shortly in our breakout rooms. Before we get into that, so understanding that in a higher institution or a higher education institution, we recognize that knowledge can influence the heart, which influence behavior and ultimately can influence culture. So here at a higher education institution, we have the power to teach our students more than just the content of the course, right? More than just circuits, more than just coding, more than just thermo. There's so much that we can do as instructors, as department heads, as deans, when it comes to educating the people who come to us to broaden their horizons on just about everything possible, whether it's related to engineering or not. All right. So it is, our job to equip our students to work in the world that is diverse, right? Part of it's diverse because of the workspace that they may enter into, or if not the space that they enter into that's diverse, the people in which they will serve is diverse. So while we know that industry is still figuring out, their diversity initiatives and everything that they can do so that they're too reflective of the population that they serve, recognizing that until the system at large is more reflective, the population that we serve will always be more diverse. So how do we make sure that we're training students and engineers to keep those populations in mind, even though their work teams may not necessarily reflect that diversity? And so it'll be up to us, if not personally, but also to push our higher ups to perform thorough investigations on the systemic racism, both past and present, embedded in the institution. Unfortunately, we have an even more recent incident of racism that has happened at UGA. And if you're not familiar with it, it was a fraternity that had said some racist words about a young woman and now it was on the news. That's how I found out about it. And then shortly found a statement of sorts on Twitter from the university. But that is a present situation that just happened less than a month ago. So what are things that as an institution we can be doing to make sure that we're creating an environment that doesn't even allow for that? Like, forget having statements that condones those actions, but creating a space that almost doesn't even allow for that to come to pass to begin with, right? And that's what we want to, that's the goal of this, is to make sure that we're creating an environment that doesn't allow those things to be fed. So one way that we could work towards this is incorporating anti-racism into mandatory trainings. This could look like adding degree requirements at all levels, so undergraduate and graduate levels, which educates on the past and present racial injustices, either within the university or within the respective disciplines. So we understand, even as engineers, what can we do to make our field more inclusive, more equitable? An example of this, could be, coupled with current training on ethics and academic integrity. So I know in my course, I teach the Intro to Electrical and Computer Systems course. We had a discussion on ethics and plagiarism and professionalism, but those are ways in which you can incorporate that in your course at an instructor level. Also thinking about, as instructors, if you are having students write papers, or if you are trying to reference, things that engineers have done to contribute to society, looking up minority scholars, Black scholars who have contributed to that field, and highlighting their work in class, or asking students to research those people who have contributed to our society, and sometimes having to do the extra work because of systemic racism. Sometimes it is not widely known that a Black person or a person of color had invented or patented a certain idea, because it was done in a time where ideas were stolen from Black people and credited to non-Black people. And I know that almost everybody probably got a notification from UGA that cybersecurity training was due, and it's due twice a year in April and October. A step forward for the university could be that anti-racism training could also be required biannually. So just as we learn and become even more familiarized with phishing scams and making sure to not answer a email from the dean that just says, I need your number, call me, and it's from a Gmail account, right? We see those come through. We get training on those biannually. Institutionally, we can incorporate this for faculty, staff, and students to make sure that they are constantly thinking about it, or if they're not constantly thinking about it, at least getting a reminder that at some point will become embedded in them, so that they are thinking about it when they do decide to make decisions, and hopefully avoid making poor choices as it comes to their thoughts or disagreements about people, for whatever the case may be. All right, so now we are going to split off into breakout rooms, and I think I'll have to go around and assign which room will get which topic. But essentially there will be 5 breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, one, I would like for you to kind of share your privilege check numbers with each other. Because then I think that helps set the playing field for sort of where people may or may not be. And then I want each group to be able to discuss one of these, so recommendations for one of these. So system-wide would be the institution as a whole, right? So what sort of recommendations do you have for the system? If there's no one in your group who has that power, who does? Identifying the power players in that group. What sort of next steps could that look like? And then we'll come back together and discuss that as a whole. So the same thing will happen for faculty, for staff, for graduate students, and for undergraduate students. Thank you for all for participating. And we have roughly about 5 minutes left of our time today. So I would like to spend this time asking one person to pick one thing that your group discussed and share with the group at large. So let's start with the system-wide folks.
Yeah, so hi everyone. You might want to stop sharing screen, Racheida, so we can all see each other in the gallery view. Hello everyone, I see your faces now. So in the system-wide group, we actually used as a base for our discussion some of the changes that a few folks have been trying to push with regard to the GRE and getting rid of that at the college level as a way to introduce some system-wide opportunities and challenges. And some big ideas we took away from that conversation are that the way the organization is hierarchically organized can be both a challenge in that, you know, there are some people in our system who are very attached to routines and processes that are already in place. And there's a fear of sort of like what happens if those processes that I've gotten used to change. And those people are often the ones with the ultimate decision-making power over changing that process. But we also pointed out that having that hierarchy in place is also an opportunity. We know exactly who needs to be persuaded, who has the power to make the decision if change is to ultimately be made. So those, you asked for just one thing, Racheida, and I know we're running short on time, so I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, John. Faculty?
Hi, this is Amy Brooks. So I'll try to be quick. In the faculty group, we had a lot of good conversation. Kind of the key takeaways were that we should start to establish baselines for faculty members, so kind of training and helping individuals inform themselves and others of their own perspectives and biases, then using that information as data points to inform tools and actually actionable items. And so we knew that some work is already being done with like the task force on diversity, but there was a lot of discussion on establishing dedicated roles or an office for diversity and inclusion. And then improving communications, increasing visibility, and synergizing different activities that are happening among faculty members so that more alliances can be formed and there's more collective representation of ideas. And it's maybe easier for faculty to advocate for what they want. And then kind of the last thing that we talked about was sort of, I guess, for lack of a better word, investing in future faculty. So I'm a graduate student. I think that's kind of why this came up, but kind of talking about how we can use future faculty members or people who are going to be moving into that role sooner to advocate and demand for change. So I think those are the main points that we had for the faculty discussion.
I think the biggest takeaway for our faculty discussion was the synergism and the alliance, like just making sure that there's more of like a unification and a group communication amongst, especially starting with our college.
All right, thank you, Amy and Grace. All right, staff?
Go for it, Amber.
So we were, very similar to some of the ideas from the faculty group. and that we would like, some more training, not only for current employees, but especially in the onboarding process and the hiring process. And also, we did talk a little bit about the difference potentially in discrimination and job security, and how staff may not feel as comfortable reporting some discrimination that they may face in comparison with some faculty, especially if they do report to a faculty member. So we talked about that also being a piece of training that could come in the onboarding process. And also, sharing amongst staff members. So I know one thing we've discussed with Dean Leo already is having a staff retreat, and we can even incorporate training into that. So we do hope that's something we can push forward.
All right, thank you, Amber. Graduate students?
I can go ahead. So this group had Devanshi, Ram, and Casey and me in it, and because another group stole Ross from us. So the big idea that we had was Casey was talking about the importance of activities that connect different people, so connect staff and faculty and deans and undergraduate students and graduate students in small groups, so we can understand each other's perspectives more. And then Brahm and Devanshi had talked about some really cool books. One of them was White Fragilities, another one For Agreements. And so we were sort of combining those ideas into maybe having, maybe a bit similar to the Odyssey program, perhaps, sort of these book clubs or some kind of clubs that bring different people together, where there's a space where topics related to diversity and inclusion can be discussed, and benefit being feeling, becoming empathetic to other people's perspectives and really building those connections between different people on campus. And so that's sort of the idea that we were playing around with.
All right, and lastly, undergraduate students.
So we discussed so a lot of similar things to what's been voiced thus far. I mean, we talked initially about what's a long-term strategy, and part of that would be hiring more diverse faculty and staff. I know that's easier said than done, but I think our students would feel more included in our college if they see more faculty and staff that look like them. So that was kind of long-term, but short-term, we talked about anti-racism training for everyone, including undergraduates. We talked about potentially anti-discrimination policy in syllabi, which is not something that's currently required, but could potentially open the door for a student to reach out to a faculty after seeing that. We talked about kind of checking in with students, especially in this time where, what's going on in the world might be affecting them a lot more and might be more prominent for them than, say, their coursework. So, just having that kind of open door policy where students are able to connect with faculty and staff and know that they have that safe place.
All right, thank you, Kelly. So it is 2:01, and there wasn't much else on the slides to begin with, so I won't even bother sharing my screen. But I do want to thank you all for joining and being engaged in this conversation. I hope that this conversation was helpful and informative and allowed you to engage in ways that may be new for you, or maybe enlighten the people who you were working with. I did put my email in the chat, so whomever took notes for your group, please, if you can, email that to me, and I will work with John in actually compiling these notes and having them available on the ED website for not only everyone else here, but also those who were unable to attend with us today. So with that, I have nothing additional other than, again, thank you for joining. John, is there anything else that you'd like to say before closing?
Maybe if I could say, or wanted to say a word as well. Like, it was, first of all, it was great to see everyone here, and it was cool that we had sort of the pyramid of people there that was in your slides. I really appreciated that. But most of all, I wanted to thank you, Racheida, for doing this forum for us, and also acknowledge that, the significant sort of personal and professional risks that you took, and also the significant emotional work that you did on our behalf. And I think that gets maybe lost under the very engaging and professional presentation, but I'm really deeply grateful that you did that for us. And it was good to see everyone engage in such a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And
Very
yeah, I don't
appreciate
have anything to add. So thank you so much, Racheida. And thank you everyone for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks, Racheida. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Racheida. It was
Yeah.
great.
Great seeing